Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted you joined us for today's MTI Research Snaps webinar, Emergency Preparedness in Motion, the Role of ICS in Transportation. I'm Dr. Karen Philbrick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State University. We lead 4 competitively selected multi-university consortia, all focused on improving the mobility of people and goods, and we are proudly funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation to lead our University Transportation Center. Our mission is to improve mobility for all by increasing the efficiency, accessibility, convenience, and safety of our nation's transportation systems. Now think about some of the experiences we've had in California recently: a wildfire, an earthquake, cyber threats, all of which can impact our transit systems. What do we do when that happens? What happens next? And how should transportation professionals respond in an emergency? In today's webinar, we're exploring how the use of an incident command system as an emergency response approach can really help us avoid the loss of life and other serious pitfalls. So let's dig in and get started. Joining me today are 2 dear friends and 2 of our nation's leading experts on this topic. We have renowned expert Dr. Franny Edwards and Mr. Dan Goodrich. Franny is the Deputy Executive Director of MTI's National Transportation Security Center. She's also a certified emergency manager with over 20 years of professional experience in California alone. Among her numerous accomplishments, in 2022, she won the Silver Award for her Knight Foundation research from the International Association of Emergency Managers. Now, Dan is a senior transportation scientist at MTI, and he is the instructor for the course titled Security Issues for Transportation Professionals in the Masters of Science in Transportation Management program that MTI supports. He's got lots of initials, but in brief, he is a certified emergency manager, a master exercise practitioner, a professional continuity practitioner, a certified security specialist. He is a veteran, he is a Marine, and he is here to teach us today. So during today's webinar, if you have any questions, please drop those into chat or into the Q&A feature, and we will get to those at the end of the formal presentations. There will also be a video made available of today's remarks, should you choose to revisit those in the future. Now let's get started. Franny and Dan, please take it away.
So good morning, everyone, and we're so happy to be here with you at the Mineta Transportation Institute. We want to talk about the role of the incident command system in transportation. And as many of you will know, the incident command system is a method for organizing personnel and resources during an emergency. It's part of the National Incident Management System, and it provides a flexible and hierarchical system for use when multiple professions or multiple jurisdictions are involved. So you can see on our slide, we have a depiction of the basic incident command system. And from these various boxes, you can have additional sections, you can have additional activities that will go on in order to support whatever the event is that you're managing. Homeland Security Presidential Directive 5 is the federal authorization for the use of this approach to emergency management. So when we began our research project, we had a few specific questions that had been asked by Caltrans. So Caltrans, as you know, has staff that are out on the freeway most days of the week, all year round, working on improving the transportation system for the state. And sometimes while they're working, doing their jobs, other people have accidents, and that then pushes them into a position where they have to decide what to do about what's appearing in front of them. So obviously the incident command system is the approach that they should use to organize their resources and activities to help the people who are in distress until other first responders are available to arrive. So a lot of us live in the populous parts of California, New York, Texas, Florida, where we can expect an emergency response in 3 to 5 minutes. So the first fire truck will arrive, it brings EMTs, and paramedics. And so the bystanders really don't have to do anything. But in many parts of the United States, even in many parts of California, there are not emergency responders immediately available. They may be volunteer fire personnel who have to come from their place of business, pick up their engine, and then come to the scene. Or it may be that it's a rural area where CAL FIRE or a county fire department will respond, but they have to travel considerable distances to get to the site of the accident. So just a few weeks ago, around the Easter period, there was a terrible accident on Interstate 15 between Baker and Las Vegas. And I didn't realize until I read the article that there's a 70-mile stretch of that interstate where there's no fire service, there's no medical care available, and the only patrol for law enforcement is the CHP. And those people patrol very large segments. So when a terrible accident happened on the freeway, it was the people who were in the surrounding cars that got out and provided assistance. And Caltrans said, if we were there, how could we be helpful? So that was the impetus for our study. We also wondered how we could not only train the field personnel, but train them in a way that helped them to remember their training. We went around to all of the 12 districts in Caltrans, and when we started our in-person training, the first question Dan asked was, how many of you have taken the incident command system? And one or two hands would be raised. But the reality was everybody in that room had a certificate from taking ICS online. So Caltrans was trying to find a way to overcome the challenge of having people actually remember the training that they had received. Also, Caltrans' normal way of dealing in ICS is that they join an existing incident command at a wildland fire where they provide specialized services to assist the fire department, such as opening a new road into the fire area or providing landscape maintenance to trim a wider right-of-way. And how could we get these folks that have other day-to-day jobs to remember the steps that are involved when they go out to that wildland fire, to check in at the incident command post, to sign that T card, to make sure they have everybody's contact information on the T card for the plan section chief? So the work that we did was funded by the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, known as NCHRP, and it was in partnership with AASHTO, the Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, who fund the research program, and also the Transportation Research Board that manages the administration of the program. So our goals were to create an in-person instructional program so that field-level transportation personnel could receive meaningful instruction in the use of transportation-related incident command system. And so we wanted to use transportation-related examples to make this training more meaningful to the initially Caltrans personnel. Because one of the challenges with the online program is it was really designed for people who work for cities and counties. And therefore, it talks a lot about the police department and the fire department doing things. But the challenge here is Caltrans is in a place where police and fire aren't going to start doing anything for 20 minutes, half an hour, or even longer. So we needed to create an incident command course that was memorable. And when we studied adult pedagogy, or andragogy as it's known, we learned that adults remember best what they actually do. So how can you have an in-person ICS class where people do ICS? So we created a course that was directly relevant to the transportation field activities. And we were trying to answer the question, what could a transportation maintenance crew do in the first 15 minutes after an event occurred? Because our hope was that within that time, we would have a response by other first responders. The challenges we had is that ICS is a seldom used skill. It's not something that people are going to get a chance to practice very often. And the available online courses are aimed at public safety personnel, primarily from cities and counties, So transportation people don't see the training as very relevant, and they don't see a reason to remember it. We recognized also that the course needed to be designed to focus on transportation personnel very specifically in that period before public safety personnel arrive. So in order to do outreach during our work, we were fortunate to be able to work jointly with Caltrans. We visited all 12 of their districts, some of them more than once, and we visited the headquarters elements several times in order to learn from the personnel what worked best and what was of interest to them. So we had in-class instruction, and then we created a suite of videos, one of which Dan will share with you in a few minutes, that were designed to be refreshers, so that in just a brief period of time during briefing training or at the beginning of a shift, that video could quickly be reviewed. And then when people went into the field, it would be something they had seen in that day or in the last week or month. Another strategy that we used was Dan created stand table exercises so that people could actually envision what an accident would look like in the field and then think about how they would move things around and use little model cars to do that moving. So they could begin to see better exactly how their role would fit in with an accident. We took the Train the Trainer course then for this set of courses out to 5 states in different parts of the United States to see whether something that worked for Caltrans could also work in Idaho, Texas, Massachusetts, and other places. We also did presentations at the International Association of Emergency Managers, the American Society for Public Administration, and a Transportation Research Board regional meeting in order to get feedback from people whose day-to-day jobs is, in fact, in transportation. So today, all of the materials that we developed for the trainers and all of the videos are available for free at the Transportation Research Board's project website, which we will share with you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dan. He's going to start by showing you one of those videos.
So the easiest way of understanding this is to actually watch the videos. If I was to try and explain this portion of the project, it would probably take me the next 30 minutes, and I still wouldn't do a very good job of it. So at this
When faced with an immediate emergency, your ICS kit will allow you to act quickly, establish incident command, and ensure the safety of your personnel. The incident commander assigns responsibility for the safety officer to the first available DOT person. Next, the incident commander will notify the traffic management center of the situation. This call will be brief, allowing the incident commander to focus on the event. The incident commander assigns the next available DOT person to be the planning chief. The planning chief stages the incident command on the side of a vehicle to begin compiling information. The incident commander assigns the next available DOT person to be the logistics chief to inventory available supplies. The safety officer provides updates to the planning chief to be logged in on the forms. An update for the traffic management center is made. This update will be more detailed and longer. If specific information is being requested, planning can take over. Logistics reports on inventory to the incident commander. Resources including water, medical supplies, and the vehicles are all good. The porta potty was damaged by a tire. The incident commander directs logistics to consult with planning for a facility location. If more qualified personnel are available, a transfer of responsibility should be made. In this case, a more experienced person is available and a change of position ensues. Once personnel are accounted for, command has been notified and updated, inventory made and incident assessed, an action plan can be created, and an operations chief assigned.
And then maybe go ahead and end the video. Thought process that went into this was actually counterintuitive from a traditional first responder perspective. We turned around and looked at it from a position that the Caltrans personnel, that the DOT personnel in general would be out there doing something else, that they were not oriented towards this type of an event at all. And as long as they had access to a kit, that they'd be able to turn around and start this process up. Traditional first responders, when they arrive on the scene, they've already been through a briefing. Dispatch has already brought them up to speed with as much information as possible. They already have an understanding of what's in their vehicles because they're constantly inventorying them to make sure that they have everything that they need. So invariably, you end up with this, prearranged thought process that when they arrive on scene, that it's going to be chaotic and they're going to have to start building up from ground zero. Well, what happens if you're out there doing something else entirely? And now you're having to transition over to that thought process. So the idea here was to come up with a kit that was going to use a bunch of old school techniques. The biggest one of all being checklists. And that's the reason why you have the laminated cards. Each one of the positions turns around and pulls out specifics for that particular discipline, for the plan section, for the safety officer, et cetera, that comes straight out of the incident command guides, the field operational guides. So there's no conflict that's there. The idea is to get them mentally going in the right direction. And then as they transition fully into the event, they're in a much better position. They're not making mistakes along the way if they're relying on the cards. So that'll get them through the first 15, 20 minutes. And then it's a matter of, well, okay, do we have to transition to a longer operations, in which case they're now in a position to be able to reference the field operations guide? Or is it one of those things where they're going to be transitioning over and transferring their responsibilities over to another entity that's arriving on scene? So that's what the cards are all about. They have all of those key factors that are in there, so you do not need to turn around and dig through the fog manual to find them. In fact, the checklists provide you with details to where to go in the fog to find them. So the other major part about it that was we brought up was the folder itself, being able to unfold it, put it into a door frame, slam it shut. And the idea is that in a lot of cases, the plan section chief may have the forms that they're supposed to be filling out, but oftentimes it's in a ring binder. And as a result, they'll have people coming up to them and constantly asking them the same question over and over and over again. By turning around and putting it up on basically a bulletin board that's constantly being updated, they're now in a position of being able to walk up, look over the shoulder of the plan section chief, and immediately orient themselves and gain the information that they need to have access to. This increases the situational awareness for everybody, and there's a better common operational picture that develops out of that. So it's, oh yeah, if I could, please. So these ideas are all simple and they go way back in time. They're been used at different points and everything. So yeah, it's a real transition back. I'm not sure if we've got any more slides. No, there we go. So the idea of this with the training with the staff members is to actually set up what I refer to as a sand table. And that's a common industry term. And the idea is that we actually have a whole series of small little cars. You can see that in the bottom picture in the right-hand corner. And what I found is that if you start digging through the kids section in Amazon, you'll find the little car kits are still out there. I was able to pick them up for about $10 a piece, but after COVID, the inflation and everything else, they're probably going for more like 20. But the tape, it's called civil engineer tape, and it's about $6-7 a roll. The nice thing about it is it doesn't leave any residue and allows you to build whatever road structure you want. I mean, I've constructed overpasses with the stuff, and it's kind of an interesting experience. But what it allows is a three-dimensional representation of a scene, so that everybody can again turn around and see it, develop a common operational understanding and picture of it, and then start acting accordingly. If you turn around and try and just read a scenario like that to somebody, they have to reconstruct it in their minds. And believe me, if you have 15 people in the room, you're going to have 15 different images that are going to be created. So again, having a common framework is best to work from. And again, it's something where we try and keep the events fairly simple. We try and emphasize the use of the kit, the transition from normal operations to the incident command system, and then beyond that. The cards also include other portions of it, including joining an existing incident command, which is often a big one for transportation. Where they'll be called in by fire or law enforcement to turn around and back up their operations. And in a lot of cases, they're provided with very little information. So again, the card set that's specifically on that in this kit is designed to enable somebody before they even leave their corporate yard to be able to go through it, develop a whole series of questions that need to be answered before they even leave. And then when they arrive on scene, it takes them through the process of how to check in. It also has transfer of command and so on. So anyway, all the videos are included on that, including how to build the kit itself. And it's open to customization, so that anybody can turn around and take this thing and modify it, take key portions of it.
So we've had a few questions submitted prior to the start of the webinar. And the first was, what are some of the challenges you've seen or experienced in training transportation professionals specifically on the use of ICS?
Keep it simple, keep it straightforward. That's really difficult because, again, the incident command system, the training that it's set up for right now was all brought over from fire. Fire learns how to use the incident command system on a day-to-day basis, and then they are provided the training. So let's take it through a chronological event. If you were to join a fire department, you might work with them for 2 to 3 years before you even see ICS 100. And then it might be another 3 to 4 years before you see ICS 200. And by that point, it's more of an explanation as to why we're doing it this way, as opposed to how we're doing it. They already know that from, at that point, it would be 7, 8 years worth of experience. So it fits in very neatly. But for everybody else, unfortunately, we're starting from the ground up.
Okay. And then what's the significance of the ongoing training and exercises for ICS and keeping people responding to an emergency ready to act? I think this has to do with making sure people are response ready, even in the absence of events for the long periods of time.
Yeah, no, the key emphasis on the incident command system has always been on safety. And it's more a matter of making sure that your personnel are being kept in a safe status. They're being monitored. There's an understanding of what's going on with the events, so that people aren't blundering into things and hurting themselves. I mean, that was its primary design back in the 1970s, and it continues to be so. So it's consistent with the other messages that DOT personnel receive, transportation transit personnel receive on a daily basis, dealing with safety. This is just a more organized structure to more effectively deal with resources, and again, ensure that the personnel are doing so in a safe condition.
Mm-hmm. Which actually,
by having the very brief videos that can be shown at briefings. That's a way of keeping the information fresh in the minds of the people that are going to go out in the field.
Mm-hmm. And Franny and Dan, I know from years of working with you that you're big fans of checklists and making sure that things are not necessarily online or using systems that could be disrupted in the event of an emergency. And so when you're thinking about this consistent messaging, can you distill down what the objectives or essential key takeaways are of ongoing ICS training?
I think the essential message is that the incident command system is embedded in the way we respond to emergencies, but it can also be used for planning for day-to-day events, pre-planned events like parades and so forth. So knowing how to work within the system, how to collaborate with police and fire, or how to lead the system is critically important. And as you said, that's the reason that we have the checklists and they're on a ring so that this collection can be taken apart and distributed, as you saw in the video, so that people who have had training but haven't had it for a while now have something in their hand that guides them through the first steps in incident command system, which should stimulate their memory and help them to apply what they've learned in the past.
Federal requirements for the incident command system training are that you only have to attend it once. And as long as you have access to your certificate to prove that you've been through it, you're completely okay. So we've had personnel that were exposed to this 20 years ago that, have never used it. And now they're in a situation where they may be called upon to use it. And, according to their training, they're supposed to be capable of. But again, it's something where if you're not going to use it, you're going to lose it.
Well, I think the other thing that it's at least jogging my memory about is when we're in a situation where it's a true crisis or emergency, our bodies are going crazy. Our cortisol levels are completely out of whack. We're being flooded with stress hormones, the fight or flight symptoms and response. And I'm thinking, you had training 20 years ago. Isn't that all going to go out the window in addition to the length of time when that anxiety is so high? What's your best advice for people in kind of dealing with some of those other challenges as they're trying to operate within an emergency?
Well, my experience as an emergency manager and then also assistant fire chief who went to fires for 3 years, the checklists are what always saved me, because at the time of the event, you're right, sometimes you arrive and think, what in the world am I supposed to do? But when you have your field operations guide manual, if you're a firefighter, or you have your card set, if you're a transportation worker, you don't have to be worried that you're going to forget what you're supposed to do. You can simply go down the checklist, which will begin to stimulate your thought process in the right pattern that's already been established for you through your training. And once you begin down that path, then the other steps become more and more recognizable to you because you've been taught them, you've learned them before.
Which that makes perfect sense. But okay, so forgive me because I'm going to go down this line of thinking here. And I'm clearly not a professional in this space, but you were assistant fire chief. You knew you were going out on those emergencies. You knew to have that checklist or those laminated cards. When you're a transportation professional, you're not necessarily prepared for that emergency to strike. So what's your best advice for making sure people have their hands on those laminated cards, those checklists, those binders, whatever it is, and that they can find them and implement them easily?
That's the reason that Dan developed the binder, the folder that you saw being used by the plan section chief.
I've got one in my office.
These are very inexpensive to make. They're less than $20 a piece. And the instructions for how to make them are provided on one of the videos. So when we do the workshop for Train the Trainer, the last hour and a half of the workshop is having people actually create their own folder that they can take home and put in their work vehicle. So it can just quietly sit there under the driver's seat or in the back of the vehicle until it's needed. But when they're confronted with an emergency, they know they have that resource there. And rather than going into a kind of panic mode where, oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, they can turn to the folder, open it up, and they know the cards are there. They know the fog manual's there, and they have confidence then that they can move forward effectively by following their training.
Even the only thing to remember about the kit is that the kit exists and that it has the checklist built into it.
Mhm.
They're able to go from there. The checklist literally will take them through the entire process.
And for those who are participating in today's webinar, Alvarina has dropped a link to that into the chat so that you too can recreate that particular asset in your own lives if you need to. And she's dropping links into many of their other publications. I personally have a family go box that was put together based on their best advice, and I highly recommend it for anybody. But I digress. We've got lots of other questions, so let me read this one verbatim. What are some common misconceptions about ICS, and how can these be addressed to promote greater adoption in the transportation industry?
Well, probably the biggest one that I can think of right now is a conflict between the incident command system and something called the traffic incident management system. That's originated with the I-95 corridor probably about 30, 35 years ago. And the thought process is that the two are incompatible. Nothing could be further than the truth. The traffic incident management system, when they created it, they had specific problems with the organizational structure of how it was supposed to be carried out. The incident command system plugs very neatly into that box, and the two are completely compatible. They're both geared towards safety. So it's one of those things where if you're aware, it's not. So please take a look at both of them to make sure that there's that's clear. That's probably the biggest misconception that we've run into as far as transportation is concerned. But beyond that, it's one of those things of, just ICS in general. It's something that the fire department does, and we're all supposed to be trained on it. But when they show up, they're going to be the lead. Well, here's the problem. Under the model that we're talking about, some of the events that can occur, you may not have fire show up for, in some cases, up to an hour, depending on different circumstances that are going on. There are parts of this country that are so rural that if you have law enforcement response and they call for backup, it may be another 30 to 40 minutes minimum before somebody shows up, and often that's a rancher that'll turn around and back them up. So when you start getting away from the urban centers, it really becomes a real who's who out in the middle of nowhere. And that's part of the problem. You really need to start getting an event organized very early on. Otherwise, you're going to be dealing with a secondary disaster where whoever actually shows up, 20 minutes later, 2 hours later, they're going to be in a situation where they're not only going to be dealing with the main event, but they're also going to be trying to clean up whatever mess was created as part of the initial response effort. So
another thing I think that's really important is when personnel are in the field and an accident happens within their purview in the area where they're working, their normal human response is they want to do something, but they're not always sure what they can do or what they can do safely. And so by having them trained in incident command system and have this card set where they do safety first and figure out what the resources are, and then have an operations chief who can begin to say, well, let's go help the people that are bleeding. Let's go help extricate somebody from a car that's on fire. Whatever the actions are that are needed can be better organized rather than people just running off and trying to do the best they can in a disorganized fashion and maybe missing the most important activity they could have done to save a life.
Very good. Franny, Dan, may I ask you to stop sharing your screen so that people can see your full video faces?
Sure.
There, that's perfect. And then I'm going to read a question that was just dropped into chat. And that is, how do you explain the concepts of unified command? For example, your agency will have an incident commander for its operations, but the overall incident commander is fire. So what are your thoughts on unified command?
Yeah, unified command is one of the building blocks of ICS. And it's used whenever you have more than one jurisdiction that has responsibility. So most recently, we saw a big unified command created for the Baltimore Bridge collapse, because there you had the Coast Guard that was responsible for the water level response. You had the local fire department that was responsible for the bridge level response. And then you had the state agency that owned the transportation facility that was responsible for figuring out how to deconstruct that facility and move it out of the shipping channel. So they had to work together, and transportation was a critical piece, because not only did they own the facility and have the greatest likelihood of getting quick funding for dealing with the problem, but they also had the engineering expertise to figure out how to remove that structure from the ship and from the channel. But as long as there was a life safety issue, which there was until they were convinced that they were doing body recovery, for that period of time, fire had the primary responsibility. But that didn't change the fact that transportation was still responsible for the pieces of metal lying in the water. So by having the unified command, the three leads, the captain of the port, who's the Coast Guard, the head of the local fire department, and the head of the local Department of Transportation, well, in this case, the State Department of Transportation, sit together and jointly make decisions that the rest of the incident command team then carries out. So the biggest difference between day-to-day and unified command is, instead of a single, let's say, battalion chief or assistant chief being in charge by him or herself, you now have a group of people who work together as a team, and they can each put forward their own expertise and then bring that together to make a good plan to try to resolve the problem.
That was an excellent comprehensive response to that unified structure. Thank you for using not only a transportation example, but something that's in our recent memories, our recent collective memories, and something that was deeply emotional for many. I mean, it was a serious tragedy. How often, and this was submitted from an attendee, should someone take a refresher course on ICS?
That's going to vary, of course, depending on what their position is and how often, they anticipate running into this kind of thing. I would say that I would go for at least every 3 months. And I'm not talking about a very comprehensive, approach. I'm simply talking about, reviewing the video, that we just showed. I mean, that was a 3-minute video. So, you're looking at just watching it briefly just to be, reorient yourself as to, okay, yeah, hey, this thing is there. Move forward. I'm talking about somebody who's, again, working in the field, somebody who's, likely to have something happen, on their watch. They're out in the middle of, nowhere often, doing maintenance, doing, road repairs. It may be one of those things where they're just, the landscapers. But it doesn't have to be that invasive. I mean, everybody thinks that, oh, well, I've got to spend a half hour, half of a day or whatever to do this stuff. If you're being frequently reminded, like I said, every 3 months, but only for, 2-3 minutes, that's more than enough. It's just to jog your memory enough to let you know that, hey, this thing is there. And of course, the longer you go in between, the more likely you are to, forget about it. So it's one of those things where, again, go back, watch a couple of the videos if it's been 6 months, a year, that kind of thing. So again, it's not a tremendous amount of time. We're looking at what they call tailgate training. It's something that's down and dirty, something that's that's done every now and then to turn around and just remind the crews, hey, this is here, this is a tool that can be used, this is how we do things. That's it.
And I think that's really important, because that's some really low-hanging fruit. That's actionable intelligence. That's easy to implement. That's not a big ask. When you said every 3 months, I went, ooh, because I'm thinking, oh my God, what are we going to add to the list here? But 3 minutes is totally doable. And Franny, did I cut you off by accident? Were you about to say something?
I was just going to add that in our training package, we also have 2 sets of refresher materials that people can use to have a conversation. So maybe 1 month you watch the video at the tailgate training, and the next month, maybe you do the conversation where there's a scenario proposed, and then the people in the group get out their card set and determine what they would do for next steps if they were in that scenario. And by using that combination, you have the more passive action of watching the video, and then the more active adults remember best what they do, thinking through, oh, how would I use this card? What would I actually do in this kind of scenario? And we have 5 different scenarios for tailgate, which is when you're outdoors and don't have any AV support. And then we have 5 for indoors, when you can have a PowerPoint to stimulate the discussion.
One of the ideas that was actually brought up by one of the Caltrans districts was how about taking this thing, setting it up, if you've got the space for it, an extra classroom, that kind of thing, where you set up a sand table of a major construction event and show how, yeah, hey, look, if we had a problem here, how would we handle it? So it's not only one of those things where they're using it for emergency management, it's also for contingency planning and dealing with their, repairs. But if there was an emergency situation and they had to resort to using, the incident command system, it's an easy transition over. So they're able to show, hey, look, at this point, we'd probably be looking at breaking out the ICS kit and turning around and going through those stages, because now we're dealing with life safety issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's something where we need to get fire, we need to get medical person out there, to deal with it. How would that process be handled? What would it look like? So other than just calling 911 and handing it over to somebody else, you're able to go a little bit more proactive with it and be in a position of being able to, gracefully hand the whole process over to the first responders as they arrive, as opposed to, okay, you guys are here, you're now in charge, you sort it out.
Point well taken. And I'm sorry to say, with that, our time has come to a close. But I just have to say, you've used terms like tailgate training, like these fun party games. So to me, I'm hearing if you're having an evening cocktail party, you might have your next game all selected for you. It sounds like it could be a really good time. But seriously, Franny and Dan, thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And for those who are interested in learning more, we do offer a certificate in safety, security, and emergency management. You can earn that in only 4 courses. It's part of our overall Masters of Science in Transportation Management program, but it is a standalone certificate. And this certificate offers students a very unique opportunity to develop expertise across these 3 interrelated areas, because they're all related to safety and security of our nation's infrastructure. If you'd like to learn more, a link has been dropped into chat. I'd also like to stress that Franny and Dan are 2 of the most open and available professionals you'll meet. If you'd like to continue the discussion or follow up with them on additional ideas, their contact details have also been dropped into the chat. So thank you again, and a video will be made available later today. With that, our time together has come to a close, and I wish you all a very safe day. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.